So hi everyone, welcome today. I'm going to talk you through leveraging behavioural science in a programmatic advertising. Hopefully today you'll be able to go away with some different ideas about how to use programmatic, as well as maybe a clearer idea of what programmatic advertising is. We'll also, peppered throughout, we're going to talk quite a lot about StackAdapt, who is our DSP partner. We are agnostic with our DSPs that we can use, but we do work with StackAdapt quite a lot, and they have a really great product when we're looking to activate programmatically. So I wanted to start off with answering the question of what is programmatic media buying essentially, because programmatic is quite often a term that is used, but it's not always fully understood exactly what we mean when we say programmatic. So essentially it's just the automated technology used for inventory buying essentially. So way back sort of 10 years ago, when sort of bidding strategies essentially were not as common, programmatic was one of the main platforms where we would be using more of that technology. That's obviously become more widely used, but essentially when we do look at programmatic activation, it's typically platforms such as, or formats such as display, video, which we're generally more comfortable with, but also includes your digital out of home, in-game, native, connected TV, and as well as audio as well. So programmatic is more than just your video and display. It can mean that we activate across a variety of different formats. So programmatic, the reason we use programmatic is it has a specific role that it can play within our media planning and activation. So programmatic can help solve many challenges that we have with our brands that we work with. So for example, struggling to increase market share. So having more of that awareness and helping brands to increase that awareness and consideration within the market share to improve their reach essentially for their message and their brand. Brands that don't see they're having cut through on their upper funnel channels, so they're having problems with the specific audiences. Sometimes there's quite a lot of noise that's coming through in terms of who they're trying to speak to from an audience perspective on those different formats. And finally, the ability to improve lead quality. So I've worked with brands where they've maybe started using sort of the GDN or kind of a similar, Google-centric display video formats, but actually moving from a programmatic perspective has enabled us to create leads that are of a higher quality than we would do otherwise. And we're all familiar with the marketing funnel, but what I wanted to do was essentially sort of overlay onto that where programmatic can appear. And actually programmatic in theory can be present throughout the funnel. So quite often it is just considered as an awareness and consideration channel. However, from a retargeting perspective and actually some of the different formats, you can integrate programmatic activation throughout that funnel, engaging with customers throughout their customer journey. So how does programmatic buying actually work? So there are quite a lot of kind of terminology and buzzwords that come through in programmatic. So what I wanted to do was go through the process of what programmatic is and sort of dispel and sort of define some of those typical acronyms so that we're all sort of comfortable with what we're talking about. So an advertiser in this instance would be Reflect. So we would work on obviously behalf of the brands that we work with. So DSP essentially allows the buying of ad space via exchanges. So there are a variety of different DSPs that you can work with. So I've worked with StackAdapt, DV360, which is a Google product, Adobe, for example, but you can also activate through AdRoll. Amazon has their own DSP as well. Trade Desk is a well-established DSP platform as well that you can integrate with. You can use any of these platforms, and quite often they will still have integrations with all of the same sort of publishers, but there might be slightly different ways that, like formats that they've got availability to, or different ways that they activate programmatically. So it can be worthwhile to look at testing different DSPs to see which one delivers the best results for you. The DSP then sort of speaks to the ad exchange, which essentially facilitates the buying and selling of the ad space. So, for example, here we've got Google Ad Exchange, which is obviously the Google specific ad exchange, but there are also others, so Programmatic, Teads, OpenX as well. The ad exchange then speaks to the supply side platform. The supply side platform manages the publisher inventory and essentially connects the publisher inventory space to the ad exchange. So you can see here that we've got the same kind of names that are appearing. So these platforms are the same platform, whether they are an ad exchange or the SSP, but they are actually performing two different roles within there. So you do get some platforms that do one or the other, some do both. These then connect directly, obviously, with the publisher, which is where your ad will show. So these publishers, for example, we've got here Spotify, so from an audio perspective, Disney Plus, Time Out, AdSmart from a connected TV perspective. So there's opportunities there then for your ads to show, which will essentially be put in front of your audience. And this way of buying allows for greater reach and optimization. So, for example, where brands might be focusing more on Google products, so within, and that's just within Google Ads. And in those instances, if you're using Google Ads, video means YouTube. So if you're targeting YouTube through there, what you're doing with the DSP is you're accessing a wider range of video placements through different publishers. For Google Ads, again, when you're talking about audiences, you've got the audiences that are within Google, so the curated audiences, keyword-based audiences, and the first-party audiences that you can overlay. When you're using a DSP, and we'll talk about this shortly, you can then access other third-party audiences as well to engage with the relevant customers. And then finally, for Google Ads, reach is only within the ad exchange of Google's ad exchange. When you move to DSP, you then access to a variety of different ad exchanges, which again increases that reach. So that's all about the where, but at Reflect we're very much focused on the who. So we very much build behavioural science into our media planning as well, and the reason we do that is there's so much data demonstrating why it's important for us to understand what customers are looking for. So when we're then thinking about which channels we want to activate on, so we've got all this variety of different places we can speak to people, which ones do we choose to test, or which ones do we choose to look at investing in. So we've got some stats here about 79% of people say that they will recognise a brand from their sound. So if you're a brand where sound is an important part of who you are, either your branding or actually whatever product it is that you're selling, then thinking about whether is audio a format, is that a way that we should be speaking to our audiences. Video and display, so is more commonly used, but there is a lot of data to show that text ads are great, but actually there's an enhanced likelihood of purchase if you couple that with video or a static image. So 80% of consumers say that they have made a decision after seeing an out-of-home billboard. And I think within digital, sometimes you think, well, if these are out-of-home, are we getting that cut through? But actually consumers are aware of these other platforms. They know about TV, they know about out-of-home. And so when they are seeing those ads, whilst they may not be taking an action there and then, it is creating that awareness in their minds about that brand. And then it helps to push them into that consideration set when they come through to that point of purchase. And this is a really interesting study from YouGov, which looked at trust from different marketing channels, essentially. So this is for the UK. The study actually looks at different geographical locations as well and how that differs. But what was really interesting here is actually that trust, so things like TV and radio, consumers really trust. Obviously, this will vary depending on sector. But this is just quite an interesting stat to think about. Like, how do consumers trust the ads that they're seeing, not just from the perspective of what it says and who you are as a brand, but where they are, what are they doing and what are they engaging with, because that also has an impact on how that ad will resonate with them. And at Reflect, we look at understanding what to say to customers, but also where they are, what they're looking to achieve in those different touch points as well within that customer journey. There are free platforms that can help with informing some of that. So things like Google Trends to understand what are customers searching for in relation to my brand or my product. But we also use other platforms such as Captify to understand from a search perspective how different searches kind of link together. Meltwater from a social listening perspective, as well as GWI from a market research side of things. What that means is that we're able to understand a bit more about the motivations, what people care about, what they're looking for and where they're going for that information, which then helps again with the media planning element. We're doing it based on where we know those consumers are. And there are a variety of different audience opportunities through programmatic activation, many of which we're familiar with through activation through social or through search itself. But I was going to touch on a little bit more detail on these two particular ones, which is third-party audiences as well as location targeting. So I did want to just touch on this point around cookie deprecation. So thinking when we're talking about third-party audiences, particularly with all the furore that's going on around third-party cookies, is that consideration of like, what does that mean if we then don't have third-party cookies any longer? Cookies is a privacy-focused step that Google is taking. They aren't the first to do this, so this has been done for other platforms, so like iOS platforms, Safari, as well as Firefox. Obviously, the market share is so much greater with Google, which is why it's such a big impact. But what this is meaning from the perspective of using third-party audiences is these platforms that create the audiences are having to think of other ways to knit that information together. We've got 3 examples of third-party audiences that you can, or audience provider, data providers that you can engage with through the DSP. So this is IOTA, Axiom and Lottie. They're using a variety of different ways, such as ID matching and using different signals between what they've got their information on their side versus what's available on the publisher side. Clean room environments. All of these methods are privacy safe to ensure that the person that you're targeting isn't being targeted directly, but it is in a privacy safe way, which enables us to still activate through these third-party audiences. And just to visualize that in terms of how that works, so obviously with the DSP, we're using that DSP to buy that ad exchange. We can integrate that data to the first-party data, which we've sort of touched on earlier on, which is things like your HubSpot data, your Salesforce data, which you can integrate into your DSP, so you can then target those audiences or creating similar audiences. But you can also then integrate that third-party data as well. So what that means essentially, and that differentiates the platforms from what you can maybe do through Google Ads, for example, is that you're able to then access these sorts of audiences, which are potentially more enriched and have a higher validation or within that audience itself, so that there's more confidence in the relevancy of that audience to your who you're trying to reach. Another thing that I think is really exciting and interesting is the use of geo-fencing to enhance targeting as well. So within this idea, we're able to either take signals from people because they've been in a particular area and then use that to then say we're going to show somebody an ad in that area. And we've got some examples about using that element within digital out of home. But you can also use it from the perspective of retargeting. So if you have a specific location that you want people have been to that you want to then speak to them again, you can use that geo-fencing to then retarget them with messaging on their devices after they visited that location. And I think what's super important really is just thinking about that customer journey and where all of those different touch points come in. So we've got an example here. If someone visits a specific area, they see a digital out-of-home billboard, they can scan the QR code. Like QR codes had a big sort of rush in terms of like, oh, it's something exciting and new. QR codes have a real value when you're looking at things like this format, digital out of home, connected TV, where you want to be able to connect that ad to the person actually doing something on the site, which is fantastic. We could then drive people through to the website. We can retarget them. We've driven those people through to then complete a task that we wanted them to, and we can then create more audiences to target either within the platform itself from similar audiences, or we can use those on other channels as well. So it's how do we connect those different marketing elements together to sort of bring that customer journey into one. But anyone, apart from the first party data, anyone can target those audiences that we've talked about, but actually it's about what we say to them in those instances that is the real differentiator. So this is where behavioural science comes in. So we have that ability to increase that reach, and that's really targeted. So we're ensuring that we're speaking to the right people, but also that salience piece and ensuring that we have cut through and that our message really resonates with those consumers as well. And at Reflect, we focus very much on a COMBI framework as a basis, which essentially looks at the individuals, the capability, their opportunity and their motivation to deliver the behaviour that we're looking at. And I think quite often we maybe overlook the motivational element, in fact maybe potentially all of these elements, but certainly from a motivational perspective, understanding like what is the reason this person has come to do this action. We're going to talk about an example of this later on, which really highlights the difference between thinking about what you're showing someone what the product is and showing them what the product solves. And we then overlay techniques, so looking at sort of nudge theory to ensure that the message we're delivering speaks to things that the people aren't even necessarily aware of, but really helps to push them through that customer journey. So personalisation, we're all very familiar with it, and even in a privacy safe world where people are very hot on privacy, they still expect that personalisation. They still want to feel like you know what they want, even if they don't necessarily want to be tracked at the same time. But we also look at things like social proof. So incorporating that feeling of that you get through social media, and as well as using things like loss aversion. So how do we instill that feeling of like they don't want to miss out on an opportunity, and also driving that sense of urgency as well, as we kind of look at things like countdown timers and ways to kind of re-engage in a sequential messaging through that journey as well. And again, so we've got some stats here just again to emphasize the importance. This isn't just that we think this is actually what consumers are telling us. So 79% of consumers will buy from a brand with a strong personality. So how do we make those ads memorable? Because again, you're trying to cut through in a place, these programmatic formats aren't intent driven. So unlike search, where someone has made the decision to search for a product, you know that they are interested. Here, we're trying to engage with people when maybe they're not quite in the right mindset. How do we make sure that our ad is memorable? Again, 91% of people, they want brands to understand their needs. So really understanding the motivation behind the decisions that they're making, and trust, once again, appearing in there. So 80% of people factor trust in their decision making when they're looking at brands. So how do we then help break down those barriers that they have potentially created themselves by convincing them and reassuring them that, you know, whatever barrier they've got in place, they don't need to worry about because we as a brand have got them. So we've got some nice examples of how to integrate and sort of be a bit sort of smarter potentially within your creative, rather than just sort of static banners or kind of your standard videos. But things like looking at location, time of day, countdown timers, as I've already mentioned, to create that sense of urgency, but also things like weather bidding as well, where we can look at whether weather has an influence on the customer's decision-making process. We can actually integrate that not only into whether we show ads, but also what we're saying in those ads as well. And this is I think this is a really interesting one. So this is a social proofing within programmatic. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why social works so well is because there's an opportunity for people to share their opinions, ideas, liking ads or content that they see on social channels. Some of the platforms that you can use, so this is an example from Spaceback, but or StackAdapt offers a similar product as well, where you can actually pull that data through using those social ads into programmatic. So it then appears with the likes and the comment count on the ad itself. So again, it's bringing in that element of breaking through that sort of what can be kind of a, you know, it's difficult to break through where people have got a lot of content in front of them, they're looking at something else, and actually what you want to do is draw their attention to your ad instead. And then we can go further again with a gamification. So we've talked here about the ability to engage with people or sort of draw their attention to it. But then how do you make them actually sort of physically engage with the ads? So we can generate engagement by asking questions. So again, these are some of the formats that you can access through different partners. This format allows us to ask the person who's seeing the ad a specific question. That question could be anything. It not only gives the benefit of engagement with the ad so that they're not just scrolling past, but also gives you a data capture opportunity where you can then start to create sequential engagement with that person. So increasing that understanding and relating that fact that you understand their needs and what they're looking for specifically. And again, this is another format that StackAdapt offer with making your ads playable. But again, there are lots of other platforms available where you can do this. Creating that more playable format again increases that engagement. It's not something they just scroll past. It's something that they have to engage with. So we've got examples here of like scratching formats where they reveals information, or hovering over an ad where again it reveals more information. It just helps to embed that brand and the product that you're trying to push to that consumer more in their mind, because you've had that engagement moment. And gamification can go obviously beyond just the creative itself, but also kind of onto the pages. And we know from, again, behavioural studies, the impact that having that engagement and actually gamification can bring to a brand. And this is an example with Planet Sport, one of the brands that we work with, where we've created that kind of gamification process. We've seen huge increases in engagement on the site as a result of changing our tack towards more of that engagement-focused on-site experience. And now I wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of programmatic in action, so to speak. So this is looking at some of the examples, some of the work that we've done ourselves, but also from my experience of doing judging panels and looking, just reading around in industry about interesting activations that have been completed. So this is an example for Opayo, who are a payment gateway, so previously part of Sage Pay. This is an original creative that they were running with. So the creative is quite functional, I think you'd probably all agree. It tells you it takes payments online today. So that is what it does. But other than that, the subtext is quite difficult to read. It's not particularly engaging or exciting. I mean, that is a point though, I guess. How do you make payment gateways exciting? But actually what you can do is really just, sort of tap into the motivation, the reason why they are in that position where this is something that they're considering. And this is what we've done with the creative that we then developed with Opayo. So we've looked at understanding the motivation behind why they would look at moving to them. And essentially that's because quite often that the brand has outgrown their original payment solution. And so they're looking for an alternative that can deal with the capacity that they need essentially. And these ads are much brighter, they're kind of more fun, they're a bit more engaging, they're easy to read. And as I said, the motivation there from a behavioural element is really clear. The reason you want this is because you've outgrown your current gateway. That is why you want to engage with us, not just because we provide online solutions. And we've seen huge improvement in click-through rates, as well as propensity to then go through to inquire as well. And I really like this example here. So this is digital out of home use of targeting. So this is using device targeting and kind of browser data. So as long as they've got the right settings on the devices, then that data can be accessed. And essentially we're then able to tailor the creative to where they think there's a high propensity of that type of audience to be present. And that's essentially what they've done here. And they then used measurement models such as brand awareness and consideration uplifts to evaluate whether this campaign had an impact on that awareness and consideration. This was a campaign that I'd have judged in one of the judgings that I'd had previously done. This approach here brings together your SQR code usage along with your digital out of home. So this was the subway where they wanted to engage with Gen Z. So they had the billboards up in a shopping centre, and the idea was that you could scan the QR code, you could order your sub, you'll personalise your sub, it would appear on the billboard itself along with your name, and then they would eventually bring you that sub that you had ordered through this format. And it just made it massively engaging, really interesting, and they had a huge amount of buzz off the back of that. And like measuring brand buzz is one of the main ways that they used to evaluate the performance essentially of this campaign. This is an example from StackAdapt of using account-based marketing. So we'll talk about account-based marketing. So from a LinkedIn perspective and using LinkedIn as a channel. What you can also do is from some programmatic providers such as StackAdapt, you can use account-based marketing approach where you're using that specific targeting of those businesses. You really only want to speak to the right relevant customers, and you are able to do that. So again, that assumption that programmatic is so broad, it's so big, we're never going to reach the right people. Actually, there are ways for you to be quite specific and niche with using the platform in any way. So then looking at measuring for success, because obviously measurement is a massive part to play. What we find actually with programmatic is it has, the expectations are that it's going to drive kind of conversions lower down the funnel. It's going to have that direct link between someone's clicked an ad and they've converted straight away. The reality is that isn't really what the formats are going to do. If you think about what the purpose of that ad is, then it helps you to then understand which metrics we should be using. So the first stage is describing, so what are we looking to achieve with this ad? What is it trying to do? Are you trying to get someone to recall the ad? Do you want them to be aware of the brand? Is it the product awareness that you want to drive? You can then take that to understand, okay, well, once you've decided what it is you want the ad to do, what do you expect the person to do once they've seen the ad? What does it deliver? Do you want them just to look at the ad? Do you want them to click the ad? Then moving on to the next stage is, okay, what KPIs do you need to use that relate to what that expectation is? So is that a click? Is it view-through rates? Is it footfall? Is it search lifts? Is it scanning QR codes? Which then moves you on to the final stage of understanding how you're going to measure those KPIs. So again, one of the big challenges we have with some of these formats or these platforms is that you have like a walled garden situation where the data can't be transferred between the platform and say your analytics platform. What that then means is that you're potentially undervaluing the impact that those activations had because the data can't be passed between the two, so it can't see the information. So thinking about, okay, well, what platforms we're going to use? Like, fine, we want to use GA4, but actually the platform data itself will give you data that GA4 just can't ingest or can't obtain. This is a similar situation for social channels as well. So actually you can use a combination of the two to help understand, okay, well, what impression level data have we got and how do we then see that and how do we consider that within our decision-making process? Things like brand lift studies. So a lot of these platforms will provide brand lift studies if you spend sufficient amounts to enable there to be enough data for the validation. You can use things like causal impact analysis to understand how turning these channels on and off will impact, say, search traffic, as well as mixed media modelling and multi-touch attribution, which are, I mean, measurement in itself is another topic, which I'm sure we'll probably do a brunch and learn on at some point in the future. But it's definitely worth considering how you're measuring programmatic to ensure that you're not misrepresenting it and therefore unfairly valuing it in your marketing mix. And then, as well as we just talked about impressions, clicks being metrics that we can look, there is a difference between an impression, and then it's something being viewable, and then something grabbing someone's attention. So an impression, on a very functional level, is just a response from an ad system. So it shows that the ad appeared, it was shown. Doesn't mean that it was shown in the browser where the person saw it. Doesn't mean that it was even viewed. It just means it was present within the system at that point. A viewable impression, which is the IAB definition, is a 50% of an ad's pixel are visible in a browser for a continuous 1 second. So again, that is saying that the ad was there, they could see it because it was present on their browser, but did they actually see it? You still don't know that. Which then moves you on to attention, which is the customer actively looking or listening at an ad. So this is a completely different situation where, you know, this is defining that somebody has engaged with it, they're aware of it, and they've seen the ad, rather than it just being kind of wallpaper on the page. And there are different platforms you can activate, kind of go through attention measurement with. So we've got Adelaide and Lumen, for example, here. But essentially, attention metrics will enable us to understand a variety of different factors. So we can use it to understand how much attention an ad needs. So a brand that's got a lot of brand awareness wouldn't need as much attention as a brand who maybe has lower brand awareness, because they need a bit more time for people to understand and have that attention to get that message across. We can also use it then to understand what we're showing our ads in the right place and to achieve the right level of attention for what we need, and also understand what attention has been given to our ads as well. So in short, there is so much opportunity, and I appreciate we've gone through quite a lot today, but what I wanted to leave you with was some sort of tangible things that you can go away and do either today, this week, this month. So firstly, answer, so what is blocking you from using programmatic activation? So quite often we'll have things like, you know, measurement is an issue, or not necessarily understanding fully how programmatic works, thinking that we're doing programmatic, maybe we're not. Have a sit down, think about whether those barriers, what they are, and what you might need to do about them. How do you need to get buy-in for programmatic? So leading on from that, if it is a case that there's not enough understanding about programmatic, how do you break down those barriers internally to ensure that you can secure that budget and that test budget to enable you to see whether programmatic is a valid part of your marketing mix? What is the kind of tangible outputs? What information do you need to present in order to secure that budget to test it as a platform? And that is everything. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you've had some great insights and a better sort of understanding of programmatic advertising.